You still have all of it?
No, I gave it away.
What? Would have been a bit much for a newsroom.
This is you.
Oh! Who gives away Chanel?
I'm feeling fab, I'm feeling free, I feel exceptional.
You are here to help us through our current scandal.
Click, 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 everywhere I go. Yes, serve a little sex.
So I used to have your job.
With a little side of ass.
Got to go to Paris Fashion Week.
Yes, do a little swirl.
Or a bunch of pieces from the Chanel collection that year.
Let 'em know I'm that girl.
But I did not hire you, and all I need to do is bide my time until you fail. Won't you take the train, dear?
Might show up late, might be on time. Just wait, I'm coming. Kiki.
I'm going to make something of this job. You could write a book. The definitive Miranda Priestly expose.
May the bridges I burn light my way. Wait. Hope that's not what you're wearing to the dinner. That's all.
Cindy, we need that. The Brunello Cucinelli pants, love those. And you definitely need an embroidered two-piece totem set, but not the terracotta because you're so pale.
My neck is hot. Oh my God, just hide a feeling for once, please.
I just love my job.
Monday through Sunday, I can turn a dance floor into a runway. Born for the runway.
Hello guys, how are you everyone? Today we explain and review The Devil Wears Prada 2, 2026, full movie. There was a time when one woman could decide what the entire world would wear. One word from her could make or break careers. One look could silence an entire room. But that time is over. Now the world has changed. And the question is, can power survive in a world that no longer respects it? Welcome back to The Devil Wears Prada 2. 2 decades ago, Runway magazine was untouchable. It wasn't just a magazine. It was a kingdom. Designers begged for its approval. Models dreamed of its cover. Brands depended on its influence. And at the center of that kingdom stood Miranda Priestly. Cold, controlled, perfect. But time doesn't care about legacy. And the fashion world has moved on. Today, Runway is no longer leading trends. It's chasing them. Social media influencers now have more power than editors. Digital platforms decide what's in. And attention spans are shorter than ever. The empire Miranda built is slowly collapsing. Studio microphone, Andy Sachs, a different woman. Andrea Sachs is no longer the same girl. She's no longer the assistant who ran around New York trying to survive impossible demands. Now, she's a respected journalist. Her voice matters. Her work is recognized. And most importantly, she is finally in control of her own life. Andy has spent years building a career based on truth. Real stories. Real impact. She left the fashion world behind because she believed it wasn't real. But the past has a way of returning. Studio microphone, the offer that changes everything. One day, Andy receives an unexpected assignment. A major publication wants her to investigate something big. The decline of legacy media. And at the center of that story is Runway magazine. The same place that once defined her life. The same place she fought so hard to escape. Andy hesitates. Because she knows. Going back means facing Miranda again. But this time, things are different. Studio microphone, Miranda Priestly. Weakness for the first time. Miranda Priestly is still powerful. But something has changed. She's no longer feared the way she used to be. Meetings that once revolved around her now question her. Executives don't follow blindly anymore. They challenge her. For the first time in her life, Miranda is not in control. And she knows it. Studio microphone. The reunion. Power shift. When Andy walks into Runway again, Everything feels familiar, but also completely different. Miranda sees her, and for a brief moment, there's something unexpected in her eyes. Not anger, not superiority, recognition, because Andy is no longer just an assistant. She's someone Miranda cannot control anymore. Studio microphone. The deal. Miranda offers Andy something dangerous. Help me save Runway, and I'll give you access to everything. Everything behind the scenes. Every secret. Every truth the industry hides. For Andy, this is the biggest story of her career, but also the biggest risk. Because working with Miranda means stepping back into a world that changes people. Studio microphone. Emily Charlton, the new power player. Then comes the biggest surprise. Emily Charlton. But she's not the assistant anymore. She's now a luxury brand executive. Powerful, influential, and most importantly, independent. Emily doesn't work for Miranda anymore. In fact, Miranda now depends on Emily. And Emily hasn't forgotten the past. Studio microphone. The new game. Now the story becomes something bigger. It's no longer about fashion. It's about power. 3 women. 3 different versions of success. 3 different philosophies. Miranda, control. Andy, truth. Emily, influence. And only one of them can shape the future. Studio microphone. The hidden war. As Andy starts digging deeper, she discovers something shocking. Runway isn't just failing naturally. It's being pushed. Investors want to replace it. Digital companies want to erase it. And powerful people in the industry are quietly preparing for a new era. An era without Miranda. Studio microphone. Andy's conflict. Andy now faces a dilemma. If she exposes the truth, she becomes one of the biggest journalists in the world. But that truth will destroy Miranda. And despite everything, Andy knows one thing. Miranda built this world. Studio microphone. Miranda's truth. For the first time, Miranda opens up. She admits something she never would before. I am not afraid of losing power. I am afraid of becoming irrelevant. And that changes everything. Because this is no longer about ego. It's about identity. Studio microphone. The climax. The pressure builds. The industry waits. The story is ready to be published. Andy has all the information, all the evidence, all the power. Now she has to decide. Destroy Miranda, or change the narrative. Studio microphone. The final decision. Andy writes the article. But not the one everyone expected. She doesn't expose Miranda. She exposes the system. The industry that builds icons, and then replaces them. The system that values relevance over legacy. The truth that no one wanted to say. Power is temporary. Miranda reads the article. Silently. She doesn't smile. She doesn't react. But she understands. She hasn't won. But she hasn't lost either. She has changed. And in a world that never stops evolving. That is the only way to survive. Because in the end, the devil doesn't disappear. She adapts. Now we explain part 2, the rise and fall of Miranda Priestly. Power doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, quietly. First, people stop listening. Then, they stop caring. And one day, they stop fearing you. And when fear is gone, what remains? Welcome to the story of a woman who once ruled everything, and is now fighting to stay relevant in The Devil Wears Prada 2. Studio microphone myth of Miranda Priestly. Miranda Priestly was never just a boss. She was a system, a standard, a force of nature. In her world, perfection wasn't optional. It was expected. Every detail mattered. Every decision was final. Every mistake was unacceptable. People didn't question Miranda. They obeyed her. Because in the world of fashion, Miranda was the authority. But authority is fragile. And the world that created Miranda no longer exists. Studio microphone. The world has changed. Fashion used to be controlled by a few powerful voices. Editors, designers, publications, gatekeepers. But now, there are no gatekeepers. There are no rules. There are no limits. Anyone with a phone can influence millions. And that's the problem. Because Miranda Priestly was built for a world where power was centralized, not for a world where power is everywhere. Studio microphone. The first crack. At first, the changes were small. A decline in magazine sales. A drop in subscriptions. A shift in advertising budgets. Nothing dramatic. Nothing urgent. But Miranda noticed. Because she notices everything. She saw the way meetings changed. The way people hesitated. The way decisions were no longer instant. For the first time, Miranda was being questioned. Studio microphone. Control versus relevance. Miranda's greatest strength was control. But control only works when people believe in it. And belief is fading. The new generation doesn't fear authority. They challenge it. They criticize it. They ignore it. And that is something Miranda never learned how to handle. Because you cannot control what refuses to be controlled. Studio microphone. The arrival of Andy Sachs. Then comes Andrea Sachs. Not as an assistant. Not as someone seeking approval. But as an equal. This is the moment everything shifts. Because Andy represents something Miranda never fully understood. Change. Andy adapted. She left the system. She built something new. And now, she has the power Miranda is losing. Studio microphone. Emily Charlton. The evolution of power. But the real shock comes from someone else. Emily Charlton. Once the loyal assistant. Now a powerful executive. Emily didn't just survive the system. She mastered it. She understands both worlds. The old rules of fashion. And the new rules of influence. And that makes her dangerous. Because unlike Miranda, Emily knows when to adapt. Studio microphone. Miranda's biggest mistake. Miranda believed power was permanent. That once you reach the top, you stay there. But power is not a position. It's a moment. And moments pass. Her biggest mistake wasn't arrogance. It was resistance. She refused to change. Because change meant admitting something she never wanted to accept. That her way was no longer enough. Studio microphone. The internal conflict. For the first time in her life, Miranda is not fighting others. She is fighting herself. Her identity is built on control. On dominance. On perfection. But the world she's in now doesn't reward those things anymore. It rewards speed, flexibility, authenticity. Things Miranda was never designed for. Studio microphone. The breaking point. There comes a moment when Miranda realizes the truth. She is not losing because she is weak. She is losing because the game has changed, and she is still playing by the old rules. This is her breaking point. Not emotional, not dramatic, quiet, controlled, but undeniable. Studio microphone. The turning point. Instead of fighting harder, Miranda does something unexpected. She observes. She listens. She adapts. For the first time, Miranda Priestly is learning. And that changes everything. Because true power is not about control. It's about awareness. Studio microphone. Andy's role in Miranda's transformation. Andy becomes more than a journalist. She becomes a mirror. Through Andy, Miranda sees what she could have been if she had chosen differently. Not softer, not weaker, but more aware. And this realization is what finally changes her. Studio microphone. The final test. The industry is ready to replace Miranda. To erase her legacy. To move on. But Miranda doesn't resist anymore. Because she understands something now. You don't fight the future. You become part of it. Studio microphone. The end of an era. Miranda doesn't lose her power. She redefines it. She lets go of control and embraces influence. She stops trying to dominate the system and starts shaping it from within. Studio microphone. Final message. Miranda Priestly's story is not about failure. It's about evolution. Because in a world that never stops changing, the only real power is the ability to change with it. Power doesn't belong to those who hold it. It belongs to those who understand it.
Now we explain Part 3, Andy versus Emily, the war for influence. In the world of fashion, power is never shared. It is taken, and sometimes it is stolen. 2 decades ago, there was only one throne. Now, there are many. But only one question matters. Who controls the future? Welcome back to the world of The Devil Wears Prada 2. A new battlefield. The fashion industry is no longer what it used to be. It doesn't revolve around magazines. It doesn't wait for approval. It doesn't follow tradition. It moves fast. It reacts instantly. It rewards attention. And in this new world, influence is everything. This is where the real conflict begins. Not between old and new, but between 2 different versions of success. Andy Sachs, Emily Charlton. Andy Sachs, the voice of truth. Andy represents credibility. She built her career step by step. Through writing, through integrity, through truth. She doesn't chase trends. She analyzes them. People trust her. Not because she's loud, but because she's real. Andy believes influence should be earned, not bought. Emily Charlton, the master of power. Emily represents control, but not the kind Miranda had. A different kind. Modern, strategic, invisible. She doesn't need approval. She creates demand. As a luxury brand executive, Emily understands one thing better than anyone. Perception is reality. She doesn't follow the market. She shapes it. Their first collision. When Andy and Emily meet again, there's no warmth, no nostalgia, no friendship, only recognition. They both see what the other has become, and they both understand. They are no longer on the same side. The new rules of power. In the past, power was simple. Miranda decided. Everyone followed. But now, power is fragmented. Andy controls narrative. Emily controls visibility. And whoever controls both controls everything. The invisible war. This is not a loud conflict. There are no arguments, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, it's subtle, strategic, calculated. Emily starts influencing brands to shift away from traditional media. Andy starts exposing how influence is being manipulated. Every move is a response. Every decision is a counter. The moral divide. At the center of their conflict is a question: what matters more, truth or impact? Andy believes the truth should lead, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's slow. Emily believes impact is everything, because without attention, truth doesn't matter. This is not just a professional conflict. It's philosophical. Miranda's position. And then there's Miranda. Watching, observing, learning. For the first time, she is not controlling the situation. She is studying it, because she realizes something. This is not her war anymore. This is the future. The escalation. The tension grows. Andy publishes a piece questioning the ethics of influencer-driven fashion. Emily responds by launching a campaign that dominates every platform. Andy gains credibility. Emily gains attention. But attention moves faster. And slowly, Andy starts losing ground. The turning point. Andy realizes something critical. Truth alone is not enough. If people don't see it, it doesn't exist. So she changes her approach. Not her values, but her strategy. She starts adapting, learning the system she once rejected. This is the moment Emily notices, because now, Andy is no longer predictable. The final confrontation. The conflict reaches its peak during a major industry event, a global fashion summit, where brands, media, and influencers collide. This is where everything is decided. Emily plans to dominate the narrative. Andy plans to challenge it, but neither expects what happens next. The shift. Instead of competing directly, Andy does something unexpected. She collaborates. She uses Emily's own system to amplify the truth. And for the first time, Emily loses control of the narrative, not because she was weaker, but because she underestimated Andy's ability to evolve. The resolution. The war doesn't end with a winner. It ends with a realization. Andy understands influence is necessary. Emily understands truth has power. And Miranda understands both. Final message. The future doesn't belong to one side. It belongs to those who can balance both. Truth without visibility is ignored. Visibility without truth is empty. And the real power is knowing how to use both. In the new world, it's not about who speaks the loudest. It's about who is heard. Now we explain part 4, the collapse of the fashion empire. Empires don't collapse in a single moment. They don't fall with explosions or dramatic endings. They collapse slowly, quietly. So quietly that by the time you notice, it's already over. Once the fashion world was controlled by a few powerful institutions, magazines, editors, gatekeepers. They decided what people wore. They defined beauty. They shaped culture. But today, that empire is dying. And at the center of that collapse is the world of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Golden Era. There was a time when fashion had structure, a system, a hierarchy. At the top were publications like Runway. They weren't just media platforms. They were authorities. Designers waited for approval. Brands depended on exposure. Models built careers based on covers. And everything flowed through one channel. Editorial power. This system worked for decades because information was limited. Access was restricted. and influence was centralized. If you wanted to be seen, you had to go through them. The first disruption. Then came the internet. At first, it seemed harmless, just another tool, another platform. But slowly, it began to change everything. Information became accessible. Voices multiplied. Barriers disappeared. Suddenly, people didn't need permission to be seen. They could create their own platforms, their own audiences, their own influence, and that was the beginning of the end. The rise of digital power. Social media didn't just change fashion, it redefined power. Influence was no longer about authority. It was about attention. Who could capture it? Who could hold it? Who could monetize it? This shift was subtle at first, then rapid, then unstoppable. Brands stopped relying on magazines. They started investing in influencers. Why? Because influencers were faster, more direct, more engaging, and most importantly, they were cheaper. Runway's decline. Runway magazine didn't collapse overnight. It resisted. It adapted. It tried to survive. But its foundation was built on a system that no longer existed. Long production cycles, exclusive access, controlled narratives. None of that worked anymore. In a world where trends change in hours, a monthly magazine is already outdated before it's printed. And that is the core problem. Miranda Priestly, the symbol of the old world. Miranda Priestly represents that old system. Precision, authority, perfection. She believes in standards, in structure, in control. But the new world doesn't follow rules. It rewards chaos, speed, authenticity. And that puts Miranda in an impossible position, because everything she mastered is becoming irrelevant. The invisible enemy. The most dangerous threat to Runway is not visible. It's not a competitor, not a person, not even a company. It's a system, an algorithm-driven ecosystem that prioritizes engagement over expertise. It doesn't care about legacy. It doesn't respect authority. It only cares about performance. And in that system, Runway is losing. Sachs, the observer. Andie enters this collapsing world as an outsider. She is not part of the system anymore, which gives her a unique advantage. She can see it clearly. She sees the cracks, the weaknesses, the inevitable outcome. But she also sees something else, the human cost. Because behind every collapse are people, careers, identities, and Runway is not just a business. It's a legacy. Emily Charlton, the adapter. Emily represents the new system. She understands how power works now, not through control, but through influence. She doesn't resist change. She uses it. She builds strategies around attention, around perception, around visibility. And that's why she is succeeding, while Runway struggles. The industry shift. Fashion is no longer about creation. It's about reaction. Designers no longer lead trends. They follow them. They analyze data, monitor engagement, adjust strategies. Creativity is no longer enough. Now everything is measured. Views, likes, shares. And this changes everything, because when art becomes data, it loses something, its soul. The cost of speed. The new system is fast, but speed has a price. Quality declines, depth disappears, meaning fades. Fashion becomes disposable. Trends rise and fall within days. Nothing lasts. Nothing stays. And in that world, legacy has no value. Miranda's realization. Miranda begins to understand the truth. She is not just losing power. She is witnessing the end of an era. The system she built cannot survive this new world, and no amount of control can change that. The final struggle. Runway makes one last attempt to adapt. Digital expansion, new strategies, collaborations. But it's not enough, because adaptation requires more than change. It requires transformation, and transformation means letting go. The turning point. Miranda faces a decision. Fight the inevitable, or accept it. Control the past, or embrace the future. This is her defining moment, not as a leader, but as a person. The fall, or evolution. Runway does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes something different, smaller, more focused, less dominant. Miranda steps back, not in defeat, but in understanding, because she realizes something profound. Power is not about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. The new world. The fashion industry continues, but it is no longer controlled, no longer structured, no longer predictable. It is fluid, dynamic, unstable. And in that world, only one thing matters: adaptation. Final message. The collapse of Runway is not a failure. It is a transition. From control to chaos, from authority to influence, from legacy to immediacy. And in that transition, a new system is born, one that no one fully understands, but everyone must survive, because in the end, empires don't die, they evolve into something unrecognizable. Now we explain Part 5 Hidden Meanings, Psychology and Deep Theme. What if this story was never about fashion? What if it was never about magazines, careers, or power? What if everything you saw was just a surface, covering something much deeper? Because beneath the glamour, beneath the luxury, Beneath the control, there is something far more unsettling. A question, a truth, an identity crisis. Welcome to the deeper layer of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Beyond the surface. At first glance, the story looks simple. A returning world, familiar characters, a changing industry. But this is not a story about fashion. It is a story about identity, who we are, who we become, and what we lose in the process. Every character in this story represents something larger, not just a role, but a philosophy. And to truly understand this world, you have to look beyond what is shown. The core theme, identity versus success. At the heart of this story lies a fundamental conflict. Identity versus success. Success demands change, adaptation, compromise, but identity demands consistency, authenticity, stability. And the deeper question is, can you have both, or does one always destroy the other? Miranda Priestly, The Cost of Perfection. Miranda represents perfection, but not the kind people admire, the kind that isolates, consumes, controls. Her identity is built on being the best, the strongest, the most powerful. But here's the problem. When your identity is based on power, what happens when that power fades? You don't just lose influence, you lose yourself. That is Miranda's true conflict. Not the industry, not the competition, herself. The fear of irrelevance. Miranda's greatest fear is not failure. It is irrelevance, because failure can be fought. But irrelevance means you no longer matter. This fear drives every decision she makes, every action, every reaction, and it reveals something deeper. That power was never her goal. Recognition was. Sachs, The Search for Self. Andrea represents the opposite. She begins her journey searching for success, but ends up searching for herself. In the first phase of her life, she sacrifices identity for opportunity. In the second, she rejects success to reclaim identity. And now, she stands between both worlds, because she realizes something critical. Rejecting power is easy. Understanding it is not. The duality of Andrea. Andrea is divided. One part of her believes in truth, integrity, authenticity. The other part understands influence, strategy, control. This duality creates tension, because she is no longer innocent, but she is not fully transformed either. She is in between, and that is the most dangerous place to be. Emily Charlton, The Evolution of Identity. Emily represents transformation. She doesn't resist change. She embraces it. She rebuilds herself, redefines her role, rewrites her identity. But in doing so, she loses something, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, because constant adaptation comes with a cost, a loss of stability. When you change too often, you forget who you originally were. The theme of control. Control is a recurring theme. Miranda uses control to maintain power. Emily uses control to shape perception. Andrea questions control entirely. But all three learn the same truth. Control is an illusion. You can influence outcomes. You can guide direction. But you cannot control everything. And the moment you try to, you lose more than you gain. The illusion of power. Power in this story is not real. It is constructed, maintained, performed. Miranda's power existed because people believed in it. Once that belief weakens, so does the power. This reveals something deeper. Power is not something you have. It is something others give you. And that means it can always be taken away. Theme of time and change. Time is the silent force in this story. It doesn't appear directly, but it affects everything. Careers fade. Systems collapse. Relevance shifts. And no one, no matter how powerful, can stop it. This creates an unavoidable truth. Change is not optional. It is inevitable. The psychology of adaptation. Each character responds to change differently. Miranda resists it. Andy questions it. Emily masters it. And through these responses, we see different psychological strategies. Resistance leads to struggle. Questioning leads to growth. Mastery leads to power. But also instability. There is no perfect path. Only different consequences. Theme of legacy. Legacy is another central idea. What do we leave behind? Miranda built an empire. Andy builds narratives. Emily builds influence. But none of these are permanent, because legacy depends on memory, and memory fades. This creates a powerful realization. Nothing lasts forever. Not success, not power, not identity. The existential question, at its deepest level. This story asks a simple question. If everything changes, then who are you? Not your job, not your status, not your achievements. You. And if that answer depends on external things, then it is not stable. The turning point, self-awareness, the most important moment in the story, is not an action. It is a realization. When each character becomes aware of their own illusion, Miranda sees her dependence on power. Andy sees her internal conflict. Emily sees her loss of self. And that awareness changes everything. Because once you see the truth, you cannot ignore it. The resolution, acceptance. The story does not end with victory. It ends with acceptance. Miranda accepts change. Andy accepts complexity. Emily accepts consequence. And through that acceptance, they evolve. Not into better versions, but into more aware ones. Final message. This is not a story about winning. It is a story about understanding. Understanding power. Understanding identity. Understanding change. And most importantly, understanding yourself. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you can become is not successful, not influential, not admired, but aware. Now we explain Part 7, Emily Charlton, from assistant to empire builder. Some people are born powerful. Some people inherit it. And then there are those who build it from nothing. Not through luck. Not through connections. But through survival. Through pressure. Through sacrifice. Through transformation. This is not the story of a side character. This is the story of evolution. Welcome to the rise of Emily Charlton in the world of The Devil Wears Prada 2. The girl no one looked at twice. There was a time when Emily Charlton was invisible. Not literally, but functionally. She stood beside power, but was never the source of it. She executed orders, anticipated needs, maintained perfection, and she did it flawlessly. But here's the truth about people like Emily. They are never just assistants. They are observers, students, strategists in disguise. Because when you stand that close to power, you learn how it works. The first phase, survival. Emily's early life in the fashion world was not glamorous. It was brutal. Long hours, impossible expectations, zero recognition. Mistakes were not tolerated. Weakness was not accepted. And emotions, irrelevant. This environment didn't break Emily. It built her. But it built her in a very specific way. Sharp, fast, precise, and most importantly, emotionally controlled. Learning from Miranda. Working under Miranda Priestly was not just a job. It was an education. Emily learned how to command attention, how to maintain authority, how to create presence without speaking. But she also learned something deeper. That power is not about effort. It is about perception. Miranda didn't just act powerful. She made others believe she was. And that belief was everything. Emily understood this. And she remembered it. The turning point. Breaking away. At some point, survival is no longer enough. You don't just want to exist near power. You want to become it. For Emily, that moment came quietly. Not with a dramatic exit. Not with rebellion. But with a decision. To stop being part of the system. And start building her own. The second phase. Reinvention. Emily did not rush. She did not seek attention. She studied the changing world. She saw how digital platforms were rising, how influence was shifting, how traditional systems were weakening, and instead of resisting it, she adapted to it. She positioned herself where the future was going, not where the past had been. This was her greatest advantage, because while others were trying to protect what they had, Emily was building what didn't exist yet. The new identity, power without visibility. Emily's power is different from Miranda's. Miranda commanded rooms. Emily controls outcomes. She doesn't need to be seen. She needs to be effective. Her influence is subtle, strategic, invisible. She operates behind decisions, behind campaigns, behind movements, and that makes her more dangerous, because invisible power is harder to challenge. The psychology of Emily. Emily is not emotional, but that doesn't mean she is empty. She has simply learned to separate emotion from action. Every decision is calculated. Every move is intentional. But this control comes at a cost. Because when you suppress emotion for too long, you lose access to it. And when that happens, you become efficient, but distant, powerful, but isolated. The return of Andy Sachs. When Andy re-enters the picture, something shifts. Not externally, but internally. Because Andy represents something Emily left behind. Authenticity. Andy questions things, challenges systems, reflects on choices. Emily does not. And this contrast creates tension, not because they are enemies, but because they are different outcomes of the same journey. The unfinished conflict. Emily and Andy never fully resolved their past. There were no apologies, no closure, only progression. And now, they meet again, not as assistant and colleague, but as equals. And that changes everything. The power struggle. Emily understands influence. Andy understands narrative. One shapes perception. The other defines meaning. And when these two forces collide, it creates friction. Because influence without meaning is shallow. And meaning without influence is invisible. Emily believes control is necessary. Andy believes truth is enough. Neither is completely right, and neither is completely wrong. The moment of doubt. For the first time in years, Emily questions herself. Not her strategy, not her success, but her identity. Has she become too calculated, too distant, too controlled? And more importantly, is that what she wanted? The internal conflict. This is where Emily's story becomes deeper. Because success has given her everything, except clarity. She has power, influence, control, but she no longer knows who she is without them. The turning point. Self-realization. Emily begins to see the truth. She didn't just adapt to the system. She became it. And in doing so, she lost the version of herself that existed before. This realization is not dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, uncomfortable, but it is real. The final decision. Emily faces a choice. Continue as she is, efficient, powerful, untouchable, or evolve again, this time not for success, but for balance. This is her hardest decision, because changing once is difficult. Changing twice is transformation. The resolution. Emily does not abandon power. She redefines it. She allows space for imperfection, for reflection, for humanity. Not completely, but enough. Because total control is no longer her goal. Understanding is. Final message. Emily Charlton's journey is not about rising. It is about becoming. Becoming aware. Becoming balanced. Becoming real. Because power without identity is empty. And identity without power is fragile. The true challenge is holding both. Because in the end, the strongest empires are not built on control, but on understanding who you are within them. No repetition. It's time to explain Part 7, Andy Sachs, From Idealism to Power. There was a time when she believed success meant staying true to herself. There was a time when she thought power was something to avoid. And there was a time when she walked away from everything just to protect who she was. But time changes people. Experience reshapes belief. And power has a way of calling you back. This is not the story of a girl chasing a dream. This is the story of a woman redefining it. Welcome to the evolution of Andy Sachs in the world of The Devil Wears Prada 2. The Girl Who Said No. Andy Sachs was never meant to belong in fashion. She didn't care about trends. She didn't understand luxury. She didn't respect the system. She entered that world as an outsider, curious, unprepared, honest. And that honesty was her strength. But it was also her weakness, because the world she stepped into did not reward honesty. It rewarded perfection, speed, control. And for a while, Andy tried to fit in. The first transformation. In her early days, Andy resisted change. She held onto her identity, her beliefs, her values. But slowly, the environment began to shape her. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. She learned to adapt, to respond, to perform, and without realizing it, she began to change. The cost of adaptation. Success came quickly. Recognition followed. Opportunities expanded. But something else happened too. She started losing parts of herself. Not visibly, not immediately, but internally. Her priorities shifted. Her perspective changed. Her identity blurred. And eventually, she made a choice to walk away. The second life, rebuilding identity. Leaving that world was not easy, because once you've experienced power, normal life feels different. But Andy was determined. She wanted something real, something meaningful. She built a new career in journalism, in storytelling, a space where truth mattered. And for a while, that was enough. The illusion of escape. Andy believed she had escaped that world. But the truth is, you never fully leave something that changed you. You carry it in your decisions, in your instincts, in your perspective. And slowly, it starts to influence you again. The return. A different person. When Andy returns to the world of fashion, she is not the same person. She is stronger, smarter, more aware. But she is also more complex, because she now understands something she didn't before. Power is not inherently wrong. It depends on how you use it. The duality of Andy. Andy now exists in two worlds. The world of truth, and the world of influence, and she belongs to both. This creates tension, because the values of these worlds are different. Truth demands honesty, influence demands strategy, and balancing both is not easy. The internal struggle. Andy begins to question herself again. Am I still the person I wanted to be? Or have I become something else? This question doesn't have a simple answer, because identity is not fixed. It evolves. And sometimes, it contradicts itself. The role of Miranda. Miranda represents Andy's past, the version of herself she once rejected. But now, she sees Miranda differently, not just as a symbol of control, but as a product of her environment, a survivor, a strategist, a leader shaped by necessity. And this realization changes everything, because now, Andy understands her. The role of Emily. Emily represents another possibility, not resistance, not rejection, but transformation. She adapted fully, embraced the system, mastered it, and became powerful because of it. Andy sees this and wonders, could she have done the same? And more importantly, should she? The turning point. The moment of change comes when Andy realizes something critical. She doesn't have to choose one world over the other. She can create her own path. A path where truth and influence coexist. But this requires something difficult. Letting go of simplicity. Because the world is not black and white. It is complex, layered, contradictory. The rise of a new identity. Andy begins to redefine herself, not as someone who rejects power, but as someone who understands it. She uses her platform differently, her voice more strategically, her influence more intentionally. She doesn't lose her values, but she learns how to protect them within a system that challenges them. The final test. The ultimate challenge comes when Andy must make a decision, expose the truth, or control the narrative. Both have consequences, both have impact, and neither is perfect. This is where her transformation is complete, because now, she doesn't choose based on emotion. She chooses based on understanding. The resolution. Andy doesn't become Miranda, and she doesn't remain who she was. She becomes something new, a balance between idealism and realism, between truth and strategy, between identity and success. Final message. Andy Sachs' journey is not about becoming powerful. It is about understanding power, understanding when to use it, when to question it, when to step away from it, because true strength is not in control. It is in awareness. Final line. Because in the end, growing up is not about choosing who you were. It's about accepting who you've become. Fashion looks beautiful on the outside. Perfect outfits, luxury brands, runways filled with elegance. But behind that beauty, there is something else. Money, power, politics. Because fashion is not just an art. It is a business, a massive, global, multi-billion-dollar system, where decisions are not made for creativity, but for profit. Welcome to the hidden world behind. The Devil Wears Prada 2. The industry. The fashion industry is built like a system. At the top, luxury conglomerates, corporations controlling multiple brands. Below them, designers, creative directors, marketing teams, and then media, publications, platforms, and finally, consumers. Each layer depends on the other. But the most important layer is not creativity, it is distribution. Because no matter how good a product is, if people don't see it, It doesn't exist. The role of media. This is where media comes in. Traditionally, magazines like Runway controlled visibility. They decided which brands mattered, which designers were relevant, which trends would dominate. This gave them enormous power, because visibility creates demand, and demand creates profit. The shift to digital. But then, everything changed. Digital platforms took over. Social media replaced magazines. Influencers replaced editors. Algorithms replaced judgment. Now, visibility is not controlled. It is competed for. Anyone can create content. Anyone can gain attention. Anyone can influence millions. And this completely disrupts the system. The power of algorithms. In the new world, algorithms decide what people see. Not experts, not editors, not professionals. Algorithms. They analyze behavior, engagement, preferences, and they promote what performs best, not what is best. This is a critical difference, because performance does not equal quality. It equals attention. The economics of attention. Attention is now the most valuable currency. Brands no longer compete for quality. They compete for visibility. Who can go viral? Who can trend? Who can dominate feeds? This changes how decisions are made. Design is influenced by engagement data. Marketing is driven by analytics. Creativity becomes secondary. Because in this system, if it doesn't perform, it doesn't matter. Influencers, the new power players. Influencers are now central to the industry. They connect directly with audiences. They create trust. They shape perception. And brands invest heavily in them. Because influencers provide something traditional media cannot: immediate impact. But this also creates a problem. Because influence is not always based on expertise. It is based on relatability, personality, entertainment, and this shifts the focus away from craftsmanship toward performance. The politics behind decisions. Fashion is not neutral. It is influenced by relationships, connections, agreements. Who gets featured? Who gets promoted? Who gets ignored? These are not random decisions. They are strategic. Brands collaborate with media. Media collaborates with influencers. Influencers collaborate with corporations. And behind it all, there are negotiations. Because visibility can be bought. Runway magazine. Losing control. Runway represents the old system. Editorial authority. Controlled narratives. Curated influence. But in the new world, that control is gone. They can no longer dictate trends. They can only respond to them. And that changes everything. Because power has shifted from centralized authority to distributed influence. Miranda Priestly, Power versus Market. Miranda understands power, but she was trained in a different system, a system where decisions were final, where authority was respected. But now, she must deal with a market-driven reality, where consumers have more power. And that creates conflict, because authority and democracy do not function the same way. Emily Charlton, Mastering the System. Emily understands the new system perfectly. She knows how to position brands, how to create campaigns, how to manipulate perception. She doesn't fight the algorithm. She uses it. She builds strategies around data, around trends, around engagement, and that makes her highly effective. Andy Sachs, questioning the system. Andy stands outside this system. She observes it, analyzes it, questions it. She sees both sides, the efficiency of the new system, and its flaws, because while it creates opportunity, it also reduces depth. Stories become shorter, content becomes faster, meaning becomes lighter. The cost of commercialization. When everything becomes business, something is lost. Authenticity, creativity, individuality, because decisions are no longer made for expression, but for profit, and this creates a cycle. Brands follow trends. Consumers follow brands. Platforms amplify both, and originality disappears. The global scale. Fashion is no longer local. It is global. Trends spread instantly, across countries, across cultures, across markets. This increases reach, but reduces uniqueness, because global appeal often requires simplification, and simplicity reduces depth. The final realization. At its core, the fashion industry is not about fashion. It is about influence. Who has it? Who controls it? Who monetizes it? Everything else is secondary. The future of the industry. The industry will continue to evolve. New platforms will emerge. New systems will develop. New players will rise. But one thing will remain constant: the connection between visibility and value. Because in any system, what people see shapes what they believe. Final message. Fashion is not just about what we wear. It is about what we are shown, what we are told, what we are made to believe. And understanding that is the first step to seeing the truth behind the illusion. NAL line. Because in the end, fashion doesn't define people. The system behind it does. Now we explain Part 9. The Devil Wears Prada 2, 2026. Cast analysis and character dynamic. A story is only as powerful as the people inside it. Not the plot, not the setting, not even the message. Because without characters, there is nothing to feel, nothing to understand, nothing to remember. And in a world built on power, identity, and change, characters are not just individuals. They are forces. Welcome to the deeper character dynamics of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Characters as symbols. In this story, characters are not just people. They represent ideas, philosophies, ways of thinking. Each one reflects a different response to the same world. a world that is changing faster than anyone can control. And to understand the story, we must understand them, not just what they do, but what they represent. Miranda Priestly, the architect of control. Miranda is not just a character. She is a system. Her presence defines structure, order, authority. She represents a world where power is centralized, where decisions flow from the top, where perfection is expected. But in this story, she is no longer at her peak. She is transitioning, and that makes her more complex, because she is no longer just controlling the system. She is reacting to it. Miranda's internal dynamic. Miranda's character operates on two levels. Externally, she remains composed, controlled, unshaken. Internally, she is adapting, observing, recalculating. This duality creates depth, because we see both her strength and her vulnerability. Sachs, the connector. Andy is the bridge between worlds. She connects the past and the future, the system and the outsider, the truth and the narrative. Her role is not to dominate, but to understand. She reflects the audience, because she questions everything, analyzes everything, interprets everything. Andy's relational dynamic. Andy interacts differently with each character. With Miranda, she reflects growth. With Emily, she reflects contrast. With the industry, she reflects perspective. This makes her central to the story, because through her, we understand everyone else. Emily Charlton, the strategist. Emily is the evolution of the system. She takes what Miranda built and adapts it. She represents efficiency, precision, modern influence. But unlike Miranda, her power is less visible. She doesn't control directly. She shapes outcomes indirectly. Emily's interaction with others. Emily's dynamics are subtle. With Miranda, there is history, respect, distance. With Andy, there is tension, competition, recognition. With the industry, there is control, because she understands how it works better than anyone. The triangle of power. At the center of the story is a triangle. Miranda, Andy, Emily. Each represents a different form of power. Miranda, authority. Andy, awareness. Emily, influence. And the interaction between these three drives the entire narrative. Balance and conflict. The story is not about one replacing the other. It is about balance, because each form of power has strengths and weaknesses. Authority provides structure, but resists change. Awareness provides understanding, but lacks control. Influence provides reach, but lacks depth. Only together do they create something complete. Secondary characters, the system around them. Beyond the main three, there are other characters, executives, designers, media figures. They represent the system, the environment in which the main characters operate. They are not deeply explored individually, because their purpose is collective, to show how the system functions. The industry as a character. In this story, the fashion industry itself acts like a character. It evolves, changes, responds. It creates pressure, generates conflict, drives decisions, and most importantly, it influences everyone, because no one operates outside of it. Character evolution through interaction. Characters do not evolve alone. They change through interaction. Miranda evolves because of Andy. Andy evolves because of both Miranda and Emily. Emily evolves through contrast with Andy. This interconnected growth creates depth because change is not isolated. It is relational. Theme of reflection. Each character reflects something in the others. Andy sees her past in Miranda. Miranda sees her future in Andy. Emily sees her choices in both. This reflection creates tension because it forces awareness, and awareness leads to change. The role of power in relationships. Power defines relationships in this story. Who has it? Who wants it? Who understands it? But power is not fixed. It shifts between characters, between moments, between situations, and this fluidity makes interactions dynamic. The moment of equality. At one point, all three main characters reach a level of equality, not in position, but in understanding. They all recognize the system, the change, the limitations, and this shared awareness creates a new dynamic, less hierarchical, more balanced. The final character positions. By the end of the story, each character reaches a new state. Miranda becomes adaptive. Andy becomes balanced. Emily becomes self-aware. None of them remain the same, because the story is about transformation. Final message. Characters are not static. They are shaped by experience, defined by choices, changed by time. And in this story, they show us something important, that growth is not about becoming someone else. It is about understanding who you are in a changing world. Final line. Because in the end, a great story is not remembered for what happened, but for who it changed. P. Now we explain Part 10. The Devil Wears Prada 2, 2026. Real-life inspiration versus movie reality. What if this story isn't fiction? What if behind the characters, behind the drama, behind the world you see, there is something real? Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not created. They are inspired. And the line between reality and fiction becomes impossible to see. Welcome to the truth behind The Devil Wears Prada 2, where fiction meets reality. At first glance, this story feels cinematic, structured, dramatic, designed. But if you look deeper, you begin to notice something. The world feels familiar. The systems feel real. The struggles feel authentic. And that's because this story is not entirely fictional. It is inspired by reality. by real industries, real people, real power structures, and real consequences. The origin of the story. The original world of this narrative was inspired by the fashion industry itself, a world known for its intensity, its standards, its pressure, a world where expectations are high and tolerance for mistakes is low. This reality shaped the foundation of the story. But in the sequel, that reality evolves, because the industry itself has changed. The real fashion industry. In real life, the fashion industry is complex. It is not just about clothes. It is about business, media, influence, economics. It operates on global scale, with billions of dollars at stake, and decisions that affect millions of people. This is not fiction. This is reality. The role of editors, real versus fiction. In the past, fashion editors held immense power. They controlled visibility, defined trends, shaped public perception. This is accurately reflected in the character of Miranda. But in reality, that power has declined, just like in the story, because new systems have replaced old ones. The rise of digital in real life. Social media has transformed the industry. Influencers now play a major role. Brands rely on digital campaigns. Consumers engage directly with creators. This shift is not exaggerated in the film. It is a direct reflection of reality. The character inspirations. Characters in the story are not exact copies of real people, but they are inspired by real roles. Miranda represents high-level editorial authority. Andy represents emerging media voices. Emily represents modern brand strategy. Each one reflects a real position in the industry, but they are simplified, focused, to serve the narrative. The difference between reality and storytelling. While the story is inspired by reality, it is not bound by it. Real life is more complex, less structured, more unpredictable. Stories require clarity, direction, purpose. So events are shaped. Conflicts are emphasized. Outcomes are defined. To create meaning. The dramatization of power. In the story, power is visible, clear, recognizable. In reality, power is often hidden, subtle, distributed. Decisions happen behind closed doors, through networks, through negotiations, not always through direct confrontation. The reality of careers. In real life, careers in fashion are demanding, long hours, high pressure, constant competition. This is accurately portrayed, but the speed of progression in the story is often accelerated for narrative impact. The truth about success. The story shows success as transformative, but in reality, success is gradual. It takes years, effort, consistency, and often, luck. This is something stories simplify to keep the audience engaged. The role of conflict. Conflict in the story is focused. Clear goals. Defined opposition. In reality, conflict is scattered. Multiple challenges. Multiple variables. No single clear enemy. This makes real life harder to understand, but more authentic. The emotional truth. Despite differences, the emotional core of the story is real. The pressure, the doubt, the transformation. These are universal experiences, not limited to fashion, but present in any competitive environment. Themes that reflect reality. The themes of the story are deeply rooted in reality, change, identity, power. These are not fictional ideas. They are real challenges people face every day. The limitation of reality. Reality does not always provide closure. Stories do. In real life, questions remain unanswered. Outcomes are uncertain, but stories create resolution to provide meaning. The purpose of inspiration. The goal is not to replicate reality. It is to interpret it, to highlight certain aspects, to create understanding, to make complex systems accessible. The final comparison. Reality is detailed, messy, unpredictable. The story is focused, structured, meaningful. Both are valid, but they serve different purposes. Final message. This story is not real, but it is not false. It is a reflection, a representation of a world that exists beyond the screen, and understanding that allows us to see both the story and the reality behind it. Final line. Because in the end, the most powerful stories are not those that are true.
Now we explain Part 11, The Devil Wears Prada 2, 2026. What if scenarios and alternate storyline? Every story has a path, a direction, a sequence of choices, a defined outcome. But what if one decision changed? What if one moment went differently? What if the story you saw was not the only version that could exist? Because every narrative has alternatives, hidden paths, unseen possibilities. Welcome to the alternate realities of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Of the nature of alternate stories. Stories feel fixed. Once told, they seem permanent. But in reality, they are built on choices. And every choice creates a different outcome. This means, for every story you see, there are many you don't. And exploring those possibilities reveals something deeper. Not just about the story, but about its meaning. What if Andy never left the fashion world? What if Andy never walked away? What if instead of rejecting the system, she embraced it? In this version, Andy stays. She continues working under Miranda, learning, adapting, evolving. Over time, she rises, not as an outsider, but as part of the system. Eventually, she becomes something unexpected. A successor, Not identical to Miranda, but similar in structure. Strategic, controlled, powerful. In this reality, Andy does not struggle with identity, because she fully commits to transformation. But this comes at a cost. She loses the perspective that made her unique. She gains power, but sacrifices individuality. What if, too, Miranda refused to change? What if Miranda never adapted? What if she held on to control until the very end? In this version, she resists everything. Digital transformation, new systems, modern influence. She doubles down on authority, but the world does not respond, because it has already moved on. And slowly, her influence fades, not dramatically, quietly, until she becomes irrelevant. This is the harshest outcome, because it shows that power without adaptation cannot survive. What if 3. Emily became the main protagonist? What if the story followed Emily instead? In this version, we see the world through her perspective. Strategic, efficient, calculated. The narrative becomes less emotional, more analytical, focused on decisions, outcomes, results. Emily navigates the system with precision. She doesn't question it. She masters it. But over time, a different conflict emerges. Not external, but internal. Because success does not answer everything. And even in control, there is uncertainty. What if 4. Andy exposed everything? What if Andy chose to publish the full truth? No restraint. No balance. Complete exposure. In this version, the system is shaken. Miranda falls. Runway collapses. The industry reacts. Andy becomes powerful, but also controversial. Because truth has consequences. Not everyone benefits from it. And in revealing everything, she changes the system, but also becomes part of it. What if 5. Miranda and Andy allied completely? What if Miranda and Andy fully aligned? Not as opponents, but as partners. In this version, experience meets perspective. Authority meets awareness. Together, they reshape the system. Miranda provides structure. Andy provides insight. This creates a new model. Balanced, adaptive, effective. But it also creates tension. Because partnership requires compromise. And both characters must adjust. What if 6. The industry collapsed completely? What if the entire fashion system failed? No dominant brands. No structured media. No clear hierarchy. In this reality, everything becomes decentralized. Independent creators dominate. Trends become chaotic. There is freedom, but also instability. Without structure, there is no consistency. Without authority, there is no direction. This version shows that systems, even flawed ones, serve a purpose. What if 7. Emily lost control? What if Emily's strategy failed? What if the system she mastered turned against her? In this version, algorithms shift, trends change, audiences move on, and suddenly, her influence weakens. This creates a new conflict, because she must face something unfamiliar, loss of control. And through that, she learns something deeper. That control is temporary. What if 8. Andy rejected both worlds? What if Andy chose neither path? No fashion, no influence, just independence. In this version, she steps away completely, builds something separate, untouched by the system. This gives her clarity, but also limits her reach. Because impact often requires engagement, and isolation reduces influence. What if 9. Miranda chose successorship early? What if Miranda prepared someone to replace her? Instead of holding power, she transferred it. This creates continuity, stability, but also risk. Because successors bring change, and change alters legacy. What if 10. The story had no conflict? What if everything worked smoothly? No tension, no struggle, no opposition. In this version, there is no story, because conflict creates meaning. Without it, there is no growth, no transformation. The purpose of alternate scenarios. These possibilities are not just creative. They reveal something important. That stories are flexible. And meaning is not fixed. Different paths highlight different themes. Different outcomes reveal different truths. The core realization, at the center of all these scenarios, is one idea: choice. Every character's journey is defined by decisions. And changing those decisions changes everything. Final message. There is no single version of a story, only the one that was chosen. And behind it, many others that could have been. Understanding this expands how we see narratives, not as fixed outcomes, but as possibilities. Now line. Because in the end,
New
the
at
story
last
you
we
see
explain
is
part
just one
12,
reality.
The Devil Wears Prada
among
2,
many that could
2026.
Hidden lessons and real-life takeaway. Some stories entertain you. Some stories impress you. But very few stories change the way you think. Because beyond the characters, beyond the drama, beyond the world you see, there are lessons. Quiet, subtle, powerful. Lessons about life, about success, about identity. And if you pay attention, you realize something important. This is not just a story. It is a reflection of reality. Welcome to the hidden lessons of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Oh, why lessons matter. Most people watch stories for entertainment. They focus on what happens, who wins, who loses. But the real value of a story is not in its events. It is in its meaning. Because stories compress experience. They show in hours what takes years to understand in real life. And if you look deeper, you can learn faster, think clearer, act smarter. Lesson 1. Power is never permanent. One of the most important lessons is simple. Power does not last. No matter how strong you are, no matter how successful you become, everything changes. Miranda represents this truth. She was once untouchable, unquestionable, unstoppable. But time changed that. The system evolved. The world shifted. And suddenly, power was no longer guaranteed. This teaches us something critical. Never depend on position, because positions change. Instead, build adaptability, because adaptability survives. Lesson 2. Adaptation is the real advantage. Emily represents adaptation. She does not resist change. She studies it, uses it, benefits from it. And that is why she succeeds. Because in a changing world, the fastest learner wins. Not the strongest, not the smartest, but the most adaptable. Lesson 3. Identity is not fixed. Andy's journey shows something deeper. Identity is not permanent. You are not one version of yourself. You evolve. Through experiences. Through decisions. Through challenges. And that evolution is necessary. But it also creates conflict. Because change forces you to question who you really are. Lesson 4. Success has a cost. Every form of success requires sacrifice. Time, energy, relationships, and sometimes, parts of yourself. The story shows this clearly. No character achieves success without giving something up. This is not negative. It is reality. Understanding this helps you make better choices. Because you know, every gain comes with a trade-off. Lesson 5. Control is an illusion. Many people believe they can control everything. Outcomes, people, situations. But this is not true. Control is limited. You can influence, guide, adjust. But you cannot control everything. And trying to do so creates stress, frustration, disappointment. Letting go of control is not weakness. It is awareness. Lesson 6. Perception matters. In the modern world, perception is powerful. Not always fair. Not always accurate. But real. Emily understands this. She shapes perception. And that gives her influence. This teaches an important lesson. It is not enough to be right. You must also be seen. Lesson 7. Truth without visibility is useless. Andrea represents truth. But she learns something critical. Truth alone is not enough. If people don't hear it, it doesn't matter. This is a hard lesson. Because many believe truth automatically wins. But in reality, truth needs a platform, a voice, a strategy. Lesson 8. Balance is key. The story does not promote one path. Not power. Not truth. Not influence. Instead, it shows the importance of balance. Because extremes create problems. Too much control leads to rigidity. Too much flexibility leads to instability. Balance creates sustainability. Lesson 9. Self-awareness is power. The most important transformation in the story is awareness. When characters understand themselves, they evolve. Miranda becomes aware of her limitations. Andrea becomes aware of her complexity. Emily becomes aware of her distance. And that awareness changes everything. Because once you understand yourself, you make better decisions. Lesson 10. Change is inevitable. Change is not optional. It will happen. With or without your approval. You can resist it. But resistance only delays the outcome. Accepting change allows you to prepare. And preparation creates advantage. Lesson 11. Success does not define you. Many people tie identity to success, career, status, recognition. But the story shows these things are temporary. They can change, disappear, evolve. If your identity depends on them, you become unstable. True stability comes from within. Lesson 12. Every system has limitations. No system is perfect. Not fashion. Not media. Not business. Every system has flaws. Understanding those flaws gives you perspective and prevents blind belief. Lesson 13. Growth is uncomfortable. Growth is not easy. It requires change. And change creates discomfort, doubt, uncertainty, confusion. But that discomfort is part of the process. Avoiding it limits growth. Lesson 14. You define your own path. At the end of the story, no character follows a fixed path. They create their own, based on experience, understanding, choice. And that is the final lesson. There is no single correct way to live. Only the way you choose. Final message. This story is not about fashion. It is about life. About navigating complexity. About understanding systems. About defining identity. And most importantly, about learning from experience. Because in the end, the greatest lesson is not what the story tells you. It's what it makes you realize about yourself.